Hey everyone, so the primary bulk of this week's Parsha, Parshas Tazria, and next week's Parsha, Parshas Mitzorah, is the discussion of tsaras. This week's Parsha speaks about what is tsaras, how do you know if a certain skin disease is or is not considered tsaras, and next week's Parsha speaks about what do you do if something has been confirmed to be tsaras, then what's the process of purification. But both Parshios speak about the what. Neither of them speak about the why a person gets tsaras. The Torah just takes it as a given that a person does get tsaras, and therefore the only conversation is not why, but rather what do you do about it. And therefore, when we're trying to understand tsaras, the bulk of our focus has to be not on the why, but rather on the what. So if we try to understand the what of tsaras, and we look throughout all the convoluted psukim in our parsha, and we look through all the details, I guess they're summarized not so well in the psukim, but they're summarized much better in the Mishnayos and Nagaim. The Torah tells us that if a person, let's say, has healthy skin, no scars or anything, just healthy skin, and suddenly this white blemish, this white decolorization, this nega appears on your skin, that nega is not automatically considered tsaras. In order for that nega to be considered tsaras, one of three things has to happen, and these are called the three simanei tumah, the three signs of impurity. Right? One of these three things has to happen to the nega. What are they? Number one is pisyon. The nega starts spreading and covering more of your skin. Number two is sayar lavan, that some of the hairs in the nega have to the nega has to sprout some white hairs, or some of the hairs that were previously black or a different color turned white. Has to be at least two of those hairs, sayar lavan. Or number three is a michya, that within this white decolorization, within this nega, in the middle, there's a patch of healthy skin that has not turned white. So if one of these three things happens, number one, pisyon, spreading, number two, sayar lavan, at least two white hairs, or number three, michya, healthy skin in the middle of the blemish skin, then this has turned from just a regular blemish to being tsaras, and it's now considered tamei. And the question is why? What is it about these three simanei tumah that turn a regular blemish into something that is tamei, something that is impure, and requires to be taken care of by the Kohanim in the Beis HaMikdash? So in order to understand this, we have to ask a broader question about what exactly is tumah. What does it mean for something to be impure? And if you look throughout Torah literature, every time there's discussion of something that's impure, it's because something is associated and connected to death. Right? The highest level of impurity, the avi avos hatoma, is a dead corpse. And someone who touches that dead body, they become an avatoma, the first degree of impurity. And someone who touches that person who touches that body, they become a rishon latoma. And then the person who touches that is a sheni latoma. And we keep going down in levels. The closer you are to death, the more tamei you are. And even other things in the Torah, for example, a woman who is a nida is considered tamei because there is the loss of potential for life there. So tumah overall is about how close you are to death. So the question is, why is someone who has tsaras tamei? A person, yes, the Gemara compares someone who has tsaras to someone who is dead, but in reality, there is no death surrounding a tsaras, unless we understand death more broadly, and we don't view death as simply a person stopping to breathe and their heart stopping to beat, but we understand death as the stopping to live, and death as lost potential, and we view life as the ability to grow, and therefore death is you lose the ability to grow and you're no longer able to improve, right? The only practical ramification of being tamei is that a person who is tamei can't associate with kedusha. They can't enter the Beis HaMikdash. They can't eat kadshim. They can't eat meat that is holy. Besides for that, it doesn't matter if you're tamei. Just if you're tamei, you can't associate with kedusha. And what is kedusha? Well, the same way the closer you are to death, the more tamei you are. The closer you are to God, the more kadosh you are. That's why Yom Kippur is considered the holiest of days. It's a day that's considered more close to God. Or the Kodesh HaKodashim is you're closer to God, so it's a more holy room. And essentially, by saying that someone who is tamei can associate with anything that is kadosh, we're essentially saying that death and God are antithetical. Why? Because God, to live a life of kedusha, to live a life that's about God, is about constantly growing, constantly improving, and death stops that, and stops your ability to grow, and stops your ability to improve, and puts this stopper in this ability to keep growing and keep getting better. So with all this in mind, we understand why someone who has tsaras is tamei. Not necessarily that they're close to or connected to literal death, but for some reason, someone who has tsaras is not able to grow and not able to continue flourishing. And the question is why? And the question is, why is it specifically the three simanei tumah that we mentioned? Again, number one, the pisyon, the spreading of the nega. Number two, the sayar lavan, two white hairs that appear in the nega. And number three, the michya, the healthy skin in the middle of the blemished skin? Why is it that these three things specifically mean that someone who has saras is no longer to keep growing and is no longer able to continue flourishing? So if we view saras not just as a skin disease, but a little bit more broadly as a blemish, then maybe we could start getting our answer. And we could start seeing this conversation of saras that appears in this week's Parsha as the Torah teaching us its approach to blemishes and its approach to flaws. Right? The Torah tells us that if a person has a flaw on their skin, it's not inherently problematic. It doesn't inherently become tamei. It doesn't inherently stop you from connecting to kedusha and growing. Right? Flaws are not inherently bad. They only become bad in three scenarios. Number one is a pisyon. Your flaw is growing. It starts spreading and starts taking over your life to the point that the flaw starts becoming, it becomes debilitating and you're not able to function because this flaw has just gotten so out of control. That's number one. Number two is a sayar lavan, when the flaw has not necessarily spread so much, but it's redefined your identity. It's become rooted in who you are. It's not just like a superficial thing on your skin, but it's like grown into the roots. And this flaw is no longer an exception to the rule, but it becomes the rule. That's problem number two. And problem number three is if this flaw has a michya, that even though this flaw looks problematic, there's a piece of healthy skin in the middle. Meaning that a person tries to cover up their flaw and pretend like it doesn't exist, and they suppress it. These are the three times a flaw becomes problematic. Other than that, a flaw is not a problem. But these three times a flaw is problematic because that's when it becomes the most intrusive. If it becomes so debilitating, or it starts redefining your identity, or you start suppressing it, that's when a flaw is a problem. And essentially what the Torah is teaching us in its discussion of tzaras is that yes, flaws are not inherently or intrinsically harmful to our kedusha and to our avodas Hashem, and that's why flaws in general, or that's why normal blemishes do not make a person tamei. Because perfection is not a Jewish value. We're allowed to have flaws. We're supposed to have flaws. I heard a great quote recently where someone said, why do we taint ourselves by painting ourselves as perfect? Right? To be perfect is not normal. To have flaws is normal because flaws contribute to the richness of life. They allow us to grow with nuance and with complexity. The struggle is what pushes us to be better. So most flaws are normal. But when do flaws become problematic? What is the Torah teaching us? Flaws become problematic when they start becoming so intrusive that they stop us from growing whatsoever. And at that point, that's when our flaws make us tamei. That's when the tzaras makes us tamei. When there are blemishes and there are flaws that stop us from growing, and they become so intrusive that they stop us from getting and becoming even better. And essentially, in this whole discussion of tzaras, what we're supposed to do is read these psukim and understand how to apply them to our approach to life and our approach to flaws and blemishes. That flaws are not intrinsically bad, and we should embrace our flaws and allow them to add richness to our life. But when they start becoming intrusive, then it's something we need to deal with. Because at that point, we're tamei. At that point, we're not able to grow any further. And the Torah doesn't say a person who is tamei because of tzaras is a bad person. Rather, the Torah just prescribes the medication. The Torah prescribes this formula for how they're not supposed to continue moving forward, but rather they should take a break, go to the side for 7 days, pause, put their life on pause, and work on themselves. And once they work on themselves to remove these intrusive, inhibiting flaws, then they could go back to the normal trajectory. And essentially, we apply this lesson of tzaras to our lives, and we teach ourselves that if you have a flaw that's not intrusive and not debilitating, then yes, keep moving forward in life with that flaw. That's what makes life beautiful. But if you have a flaw that is becoming debilitating because it has one of these three signs, then you have to put your life on pause, make sure you're working on that flaw to make sure it's not taking over your entire existence and stopping you from growing and stopping you from living. Make sure it doesn't make you tamei anymore. And then after that 7 days pass, or after that those 2 weeks pass, you could get back on track and continue growing, not as a tamei person, but as a person who's working towards kedusha, working towards living a fulfilling life of avodas Hashem, even with your flaws. Okay, something to keep in mind as we read the Parshiot about tzaras. Everyone have a great Shabbos. Bye-bye.